Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about Linkin Park and their newest album, The Hunting Party. Look, do I honestly have anything more to say about Linkin Park? This is a band I've already covered twice before. First with Living Things in written form on my blog, and then with my video review of the remix album Recharged. And honestly, I was not a fan of either album, as they felt like regressions into stale subject matter that the band had already covered more effectively in earlier albums, and a musical sound that alternated between being dreary and boring and atonal and insufferable. And you know what, this is coming from a critic who can admit that Linkin Park has never really been a bad band, even in their earlier days with Hybrid Theory and some of the more embarrassing lyrics on that album. Yeah, okay, it's material that hasn't exactly aged well in comparison with their mid-period work, for instance, but it does have a certain visceral pathos that can work if you're in the right demographic for it, if it can stick with you emotionally. And I will give Linkin Park 2 points that aren't often noted in their favor: a knack for incredibly solid hooks and an ability to evolve with the times, culminating in the excellent, more conceptual album 1,000 Suns in 2010, which I'll place myself in the extreme minority by saying that's probably my favorite Linkin Park record. And yeah, there are better albums exploring nuclear holocaust, even in the electronic rock and metal veins, but you know what, I will give Linkin Park credit for the experimentation and for, you know what, for the most part, sticking the landing. And honestly, that's one of the big reasons why Living Things was such a big disappointment for me, as it took much of the same electronic rock sound from 1,000 Suns and just fused it with adolescent lyrics that could not support it. And it really did feel like a regression to past times. And then when I heard about The Hunting Party this year, well, I had no idea what to expect. Not only did the band say they were putting aside electronic rock entirely and going back for a more harder edge in the vein of their earlier releases like Hybrid Theory, but that they were planning on showing more maturity in their subject matter as well. Now that, if anything, got my curiosity, and I'll admit my skepticism raised, enough to pick up this album. So, how does The Hunting Party turn out? Well, this is a surprise, because The Hunting Party by Linkin Park, it's actually pretty good. No, I'm not gonna call it great or required listening or anything that'll convince you that all those old Linkin Park records are worth your time if you weren't a fan before, but you know what, it's a fair bit above average, and it shows Linkin Park returning to a sound that's a solid fit for them, while still somehow sounding modern. In fact, you know what, I'll say this. This is what Living Things should have sounded like. Hell, if it did, I probably would have liked it a fair bit better than I did. So okay, what makes The Hunting Party work better than, say, Living Things? Well, part of it is the instrumental shift in focus. There are still electronic elements that don't really contribute a lot to this album. This is Linkin Park, though. You're not getting rid of those. You sort of have to accept them. But the increased focus on riffs and guitar-driven melodies proves to be a really solid choice for this band, producing a fair bit of distinctive heaviness that Living Things really did lack, especially in their guitar tones. Most notably are the shift in influences. More than ever, elements of punk and even thrash are visible in Linkin Park's guitar lines, which really is only a good thing, as it allows the band to get some rougher guitar tones and focus more on the melody-driven riffs that have always been the band's greatest strength, supported by Rob Borden's phenomenal energy and explosive technique on the drums. And you know what? There's a fair number of instrumentals on this album that I really did like. The propulsive, raw menace of Guilty All the Same, the hardcore punk explosiveness of War, the chugging intensity of Rebellion thanks to Darren Malakian's killer guitar work, the incredibly solid melody line on Until It's Gone, and hell, you know, I can talk about Wastelands for hours. The staccato guitar leads, the textured, noisy percussion, and yet somehow all it manages to all come together into this cohesive, rollicking vibe that makes it one of the best and most unique songs that Linkin Park has ever written. And yet, even stepping away from some of the rougher, more metal-inspired tracks, I was surprised how much I really dug some of the instrumentation on some of the slower tracks as well, like Final Masquerade and the instrumental Drawbar. Although I will agree with a common sentiment amongst critics that Tom Morello could have done a little bit more here. He really is kind of wasted on that track. Now in production, there are very few complaints with this record, if any. I might not be the biggest fan of every production choice that Linkin Park's made, because they've made some bad ones, but you can count on them to deliver solid work across the board, and that really does come through here, with the guitars feeling visceral, the drums having a lot of texture, and the electronic elements feeling pretty damn cohesive for a hard rock album. Now, I can't say I liked all the vocal production work, though. Given the rougher sound, I wasn't a big fan of some of the auto-tune being placed over Chester Bennington's voice, but I'll also say I didn't quite like the fuzz dropped over to his screams on Keys to the Kingdom, in my opinion, which was the weakest track on this album. In both cases, they're trying to accentuate either his melodic singing or his screaming, and it only served to divert away from his personality instead of accentuate and enhance it. And you know what, when he blatantly doesn't need the help from the production, for me, it was just kind of distracting. Now, this takes us to the lyrics, and let's make this clear, I was not expecting much here, because let's be honest, Linkin Park, they're not stellar lyricists, at least in terms of the vocabulary and flow, but what has made their songwriting effective in the past is an uncanny knack for making very simple language connect with the visceral emotions that they're trying to target in their audience. And even with the commentary suggesting that this album is going to have a little bit more of a mature focus, look, I was not expecting much here. Linkin Park were not likely going back to the big ideas of A Thousand Suns, and I saw what happened when they tried to get political too late for it to matter on one of their earlier albums. So, okay, what does this mean for the songwriting as a whole? Well, not much, because honestly, this isn't that far removed from typical Linkin Park songwriting and their formula. Mike Shinoda's well-structured but pretty shallow aggression in his rapping, and Chester Bennington's screaming or singing vaguely threatening lines that don't really require or even deserve all that deep analysis. But you know what, to be fair to Linkin Park, the focus has shifted, as most of the adolescent whinging and whining has been thrown away in favor of straightforward, hard-hitting anger. And you know what, that makes the band a fair bit less insufferable. Now, that's not saying that we're getting a lot of depth here. Guilty all the same is your standard middle finger to record executives and big business. Until It's Gone stretches a very simple proverb to the absolute limit, and an overused proverb at that. And All for Nothing, War, Wastelands, and A Line in the Sand work the war is hell motif probably harder than they needed to. Although I will give them credit for framing themselves more as the soldiers on the front line, not as the leaders, which only strengthens their populism as an act. But you know what, that's not saying that there aren't fragments of nuance between the lines here either. The Final Masquerade and Mark the Graves trade in some of the sullen whinging that you normally see on Linkin Park tracks for a more mature approach, a more resignation, and it lends the tracks a fair bit of gravitas. And then there's Rebellion, which might be the most self-aware track that Linkin Park has ever written. A realization that much of the incoherent rage they spewed on earlier records feels, well, a lot more paltry in comparison with the real global issues that affect people to this day, and how they are indeed the fortunate ones. Now, granted, I don't think the song quite works because it's still framed and positioned as a teenage rebellion anthem, and with a little bit more subtext, it could have been a lot more powerful, I'd reckon. But you know what? The song mostly works for what it is. I kind of liked it. And you know what? That's really where I come down to The Hunting Party by Linkin Park. It mostly works for what it is. In fact, it works pretty damn well for what it is, with some of the heaviest riffs and most potent melodies of the band's careers. Yeah, the lyrical conceits, they're simplistic, but they fit the borderline punk aesthetic for which the band is going, and they never really come across as whiny or petulant, or not capable of backing up the explosive force of the riffs and the material. Simplicity really is a powerful tool in Linkin Park's arsenal at this point, and it's not a bad thing. And for what this album is, sheer populist anger at those who have scorned the band and seen them criticize them and taken them down a peg, you know what? It's pretty solid fit here for what they want to put forward. For me, this album is a 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation. If you're a fan of Linkin Park's work and hope they might have grown up, this will be a great album for you. And while it might not have the ambition of A Thousand Suns, Linkin Park taking steps toward maturity, those are steps taken in the right direction. So check them out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. On July 12th, I will be going back to review an album from 2013. Either re-reviewing an album that I've already covered or reviewing an album that I missed somehow in the course of that year. So what I'm asking for you guys to do, put in your requests in the comments. The ones that get the most, albums that get the most requests are the ones that I'm eventually going to be covering. On that note, if there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to cover, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.